Early the next morning I receive a letter from him, the contents of which set forth the beauty of his wisdom, and likewise the purity of his affection, which in serious words declared that he was a stranger to love before, but has been captivated ever since he first beheld me. I was diverted with reading the beginning of his letter, but surprised at the conclusion of it, for upon reflection I found he had a store of judgment and understanding, and could not help condemning myself for my rude, haughty behaviour to him, still, in spite of all my resolutions, admiring the dictates of his brain. It was a week before I could have time to send him an answer, which was to the following effect. Sir, the perusal of yours gave me an opportunity of seeing how erroneous I was in my conjectures, for having never seen so great a number of house-carpenters and joiners working in one house, as we had when that wing was built to my master's, where a gallery window gave me an opportunity of seeing the workmen act at their separate branches, hammering, sawing, gluing, planing, and some singing, whistling, others cursing and swearing, the noise of whose pipes and voices rendered me in bedlam. Indeed, sometimes I could scarce think them rational, for as one young man was rapping upon his plane with a hammer, while he was whistling a tune, and raising his note so high as I thought the extent of the pipe, affected his sight for rapping upon the piece of wood that he had been rubbing upon the deal. Out flies a piece of iron and pitched upon his ankle, which cut him to the bone. I sent for him immediately, and washed it with some balsam, and bid him whistle after his work hours were over, as he was not able to whistle, work, and think to any perfection at once. Nor did I think you, their deputed master, had your men in such decorum as they ought to have been in your presence, as hammers, axes, adges, etc., makes noise enough without whistling, singing, cursing, and swearing, so that I looked on your fraternity to be a robust sort of uncouth people, till after the perusal of your letter, in which I perceive you are master of a good stock of reasoning, and, as far as my judgment goes, seems to tell a story of love very well, although I think it's a dangerous suit for a handicraft tradesman to make with a housekeeper of such a family as I have the honour of serving, where every servant is as happy as they wish to be by the indulgence of the best and humblest of masters. This may make proud servants, or at least you may think so, by the resolution that I have taken, which is this, that I never will marry a man before he has maintained a 7 years' conversation in letters, during which time he shall not importune me with one personal visit. Once a month I will receive a letter, and no oftener. Every 10th letter I will answer, and no more. Nor will I give him any assurance of marriage at the 7 years' end. Now my heart is free, nor was it ever entangled, nor do I design to yield it to any man that dares to intrude or make the least breach of any article that I propose unto him. So, sir, as your business will be finished in 3 weeks, I will receive a letter from your messenger at your departure, and not before. Now, madam, the 7 years is within the last month of the expiration, without the breach of covenant on either side, and if I was an empress queen, he should be my sovereign. I beg you will give me the perusal of his second and last letters, said my dear mistress, which I did. Now, said she, while I am reading these letters, do you let the servants know what different stations they are to serve me in. So communicating the whole to the cook, she acknowledged with tears the benefits that she had received from me. I told her that it did not impoverish me. What benefits she had got by me gave the utmost pleasure to my soul, to make her fit to serve that dear angel of a woman, as also that it was in my power to do you that service, which if I had not when time was, could not do it now, my time being expired. Well, answered she, you must receive the reward of good works, that never omitted any opportunity of doing that duty. And I hope you will receive the reward of your good works, in that state you are near entering into. As your goodness has been so great to us, I hope you will add to these obligations already received, and that is accepting of a third sister for a servant. You will find she has integrity, and a genius that you will have pleasure of improving. Was rather the favorite of my mother, for her superior care and industry. She was the market maker, and she will show you the way to be rich by frugality. That is such a servant as I shall want very much, for I know not how to act in the low station of life, after living so long amongst great plenty. Very few noblemen live better, some not near the plenty of this family. She will show thrift. Just as she spoke, my mistress's bell rung. Up I went, and she smiling said, I am afraid I will become troublesome to you for favours. I wished it were in my power to oblige, answered I. Madame, command me. Then said she, let me have the same liberty of all your love letters, that I have had of these two, and your master to read them. If you desire it, I said. I do, my good girl, answered she. So I gave her them with all the copies of mine, which they read with attention. So when I dressed my mistress next day, she very complacently returned me my letters, and told me how much they were surprised with the courtship, declaring that you have great sense and the art of reasoning that exceeds most of women, yet he thinks you have put your lover under such restrictions as is amazing, and solemnly declares that you shall fall very low in his esteem if you keep him any longer in suspense. In short, added she, it surprised me how you found out such objections, or could withstand the pleadings of this man, who, your master says, may plead a cause with a lawyer at the bar. Such is his wit and reasoning, as drew tears from both our eyes. He knows the young man. His master is a man generally esteemed for his integrity and behaviour, and you know very well he never came here but your master paid him as much respect as any gentleman that came to his house. He is acknowledged to be the greatest architect in this country, and he lives 10 miles from us. There is a farm of your master's, that his predecessors obliged their heirs not to let that farm to any other tenant than he that lived on it at that time, who was a servant that married from the family. Nor had the heirs power to raise the rent. This tenant is a very old man, and the last of the family, that has enjoyed this farm 200 years. He has taken a ride out this morning, and bid me not wait dinner for him. So, I suppose, he is gone to pay his old tenant a visit, and very likely may give your supposed master a call. This is conjecture, but if it should happen to prove truth, and he bring home your lover, how would you receive him? Nay, madame, answered I, if he has so worthy an introductor, he needs not fear a hearty welcome, but I cannot have the vanity to think myself deserving such notice. You deserve the respect due to so good and faithful a servant, an example of virtuous industry. I surprised your master with the account I gave him of your management of the feathers, and what pleasure it gave me to see your particulars in the order and care of picking them off every fowl. All the pens you kept separate from small feathers. The geese and ducks you put together. Turkeys, hens, and chickens you mixed them together, and after your fowls were bled, tied up the wound with a coarse rubber, lest any of the blood dropped amongst the feathers. Had separate bags to put them in, as soon as they were plotted, which bags were hung upon hooks in the ceiling of the kitchen, and after household bread had been baked in the oven, and the oven of a moderate warmth, you put in these bags to dry the feathers thoroughly, as also to destroy anything quick amongst such feathers. that you had fitted me 6 beds of goose and duck feathers, not inferior to live feathers, and that you had as many of turkey, hen, capon, and chicken feathers as would fill 4 beds more, not so good as the duck and goose feathers, but by the care and good management of them, in drying them in the oven, and thereby not only seasoning, but destroying such vermin as feathered fowls are subject to, and keeping the pens and great feathers from each other, they would make 4 very good beds. And, my dear, answered he, she very well deserves them with furniture to them, that is, quilts, ticks, blankets, etc. For, my dear, added he, industry is an emblem of virtue that merits reward. So accordingly I have ordered the above named to the upholsterer, and as your feathers need no dressing, having taken care of that beforehand, by your skilful management, they are ready to put into the ticks, and I will fit you out 4 beds. As you took care to employ the poor people in spinning, so I have a stock of webs by me, and I intend you 4 for sheets. You know their lengths, 44 yards each, 2 of fine and 2 of coarse. So shall you have also a web of diaper, and 1 of huggerback for tablecloths, beside some other necessaries that I shall think on after. Dear madam, said I, how is it possible for me to receive such bounties? I am not covetous, nor can be easy to become so great a charge upon you. The perquisites of your place supplied me with necessaries, and I have my 10 years' wages untouched, which will do more than furnish my house, and have gathered enough under the shadow of your generosity to answer sundry purposes, and in a conjugated state. Why would you load me with more? Your goodness and generosity is great in bestowing, and I am abashed as a receiver. Certainly my husband and I, if we draw equally in the yoke, may acquire bread. I therefore know the frankness of thy soul, said she, for observing the maids all very neat at the chapel. I perceived them all dressed in the gowns, handkerchiefs, aprons, rustles, and head suits I had given you, and asking the chambermaid what she paid you for the gown and linen that you had on last Sunday. Nothing at all, answered she. Madam, the housekeeper said you lent them to her to give to us, but whatever she gives us of yours, she bids us look on as sacred. Nor do we wear anything that was yours in any other place but the church, and as soon as divine service is over, we all undress ourselves and put on our homespun gowns. So folds up our clothes, which she very diligently observes. For no maid in the family she allows above 1 gown washed in a quarter of a year. So every one of us endeavours which shall keep their gown cleanest. All this I told your master, which pleased him so well that the first chapman that came with a horsepack, he bought me 3 webs of the best chintz cottons, and said, make plenty of these gowns, wear them a while in the mornings, and cast them to your maid, who very well deserves to have the distributions of them. But this injunction I lay you under, that you shall not distribute any of my castings that I give you at this juncture. For although you have a great soul, your intended husband has not your master's fortune to support it. But go and order dinner to be ready at 2 o'clock. Your master was on horseback at 6, and we will stay dinner 1 hour, in expectation of his coming. This stunned me a little, but was more surprised at the approach of my master and lover entering into the court. The steward, seeing them, said, Behold, I will wager something there is a building on the anvil, for here is my gossip cousin, and I hear my master cry aloud for dinner. The cook answers it is very ready for him, although it be half an hour before my orders for it. Although no soul in the house had the least knowledge of the story, yet my confusion was such as I believed them all privy to the whole affair. So stepping into the storeroom in order to hide it, and set up the cold things for the table, in comes the butler for them, and says, Mistress, this is the youth that was foreman over the carpenters and joiners in these buildings of ours. I think him a pretty young man, and the gentlest mechanic that ever I see. I can tell you that there are some esquires that visits my masters that has not his deportment, nor seeming candour. Every word he speaks has grace and sweetness in it. He eats nothing. Master obliged him to drink 2 glasses of wine, and master and lady seems to take abundance of notice of him. Perhaps, said I, they want to set forward some building. Very likely, said he, and took in the dessert. As soon as we servants were set down to dinner, orders came from my mistress that she wanted me after I had dined. Accordingly I did, being then quite serene. I entered the drawing-room. Yet all my resolution of serenity departed at the first glimpse of my lover. I was in such a confusion when he made a low bow to me, such a heat struck into my face, as I never found in the greatest dinner I ever dressed. My master, smiling, said, Behold, there is virtue in the highest perfection. So, taking me by the hand, bid me sit down, having something of moment to communicate to me. Sir, answered I am unacquainted with fitting in your presence. Sir, answered I am unacquainted with sitting in your presence. But you must sit now, said my master. I giving a wishful look to my mistress, who said, Oblige me in obeying your master, and with a reverent kneel I did sit down. Now, says he, before your story comes upon the carpet, I have something to say to your mistress. Thus he began, I think, my dear, I told you, that I would take a ride to see my old tenant, that people have been importuning me a long time to take the farm at the expiration of his lease. I went to see this old tenant, and found him sitting in an easy-chair, propped with pillows, and all things very clean and neat about him. Seeing me, the old woman seemed pleased, and bid a woman that had been his servant take a key, open a cupboard door, and bring him a paper that was lying on the bottom of this little cupboard, which she accordingly did. He, taking it in his hand, said, Sir, my predecessors have enjoyed this farm without molestation these 200 years. Although the farm was worth more rent than we paid, the rent was not raised. I, being the last of the family that hath acquired a fortune of 4,000 pounds, I mean, said he, what my father left me at his death, and what I have by care and industry added to it, and I was bound in conscience, gratitude, and duty to the family, from whence this fortune was raised, having no tie of blood to share any of my effects, have made you my executor. So gave me his last will, and delivered the key of his securities. He seemed pleased when he took his last leave of me, and said, Sir, I hope we'll meet again in heaven. Where if your forefathers have not mansions of glory, what must become of me? Tears trickling down the old man's cheeks, which forced tears from my eyes, to see the dissolution of an upright, honest man approach, who said that he wished that the minister would come, it was near the time, that I might join in a petition to heaven for him. Accordingly I did, and with a humble voice joined the venerable old man, who exalted his, as if the soul had been upon its flight to its place of rest. When prayers were done, with tranquillity of mind he thanked the minister, that had taken great care of discharging the duty of the physician of the soul, which I hope by your pious instructions and my own endeavours make my soul fit for its change, which will, in my opinion, be in a short time. I, finding myself very weak, hopes not to give you much more trouble, as I find my strength failing very fast. I have, sir, turning his eyes to me, left that good man a legacy in my will, he having but a very small living, and 5 children. If you think it too small, you have it in your power to add to it. So saying, beckoned as though he wanted to be at rest. The priest and I departed, he lamenting the loss that he would sustain of so worthy and honest a neighbour. Then answered I, He is going to receive the reward of his good works. He, sir, answered the priest, has lived to a great age, but I am afraid that I stand a very great hazard of losing as worthy a man that hath not lived half the number of his years. I think they will not leave such 2 behind them in my whole parish. I asked him who this gentleman was. He answered that he was the greatest architecture in the country, and naming him, I said that I had a number of his men employed in building for me. The death of so worthy a man will be a general loss. Is there any immediate danger? I can perceive him turn pale, and is not able to give that due attendance to the church, as he always was accustomed to, when in health. What is his complaint, sir? Said I. He answered that the doctor was afraid of a consumption, occasioned by the death of his wife, that he loved, and they lived in such happiness that all his resolutions could not support him under his immoderate grief. So that it is thought he is laboring under the anguish of a broken heart. How far are we from his house? Said I. He answered 2 miles. Will you show me the way to his house? Sir, said he, it is near to a sick person that I have to administer the sacrament to. So when we came to the place, the priest showed me the house that this worthy man lived at, which was on the direct road. He would have rid with me, but I bid him visit his sick, and I would be glad to see him after, as I could not go wrong. Leaving the priest, I rid up to the house, rapped at the door, and out comes the maid. I asked her if her master was at home. She said he was, but not very well. Is he up? Said I. She answered he was. But he, seeing me come to the door, I was amazed to see such a change as there was in him. For if I had seen him from home, I should not have known him. But notwithstanding his illness, he seemed rejoiced to see me, and begged that I would go in, which I very willingly did, telling him that I was very sorry to see him indisposed, but hoped he would get the better of it, as I partly was informed of the reason, which might go off in time. He said he feared it would not, as he found himself weaken every day. Sir, said I to him, you must not die. In short, we cannot want you. Therefore get well, and build me another wing to my house. Sir, answered he, I have instructed a youth in all the different rules and branches of architecture, whose integrity and judgment you may confide in. He was left to me an orphan by his dying father, who begged of me to adopt him my son, he having no other parent, and all he had to leave him was £100, which he had good security for. He was 7 years of age when I took him from his father, and did adopt him my son. Nor have I drawn any interest of his £100, and he is now 30 years of age, and has £100 of his own wages out at interest. But what is this trifle of money to his intrinsic worth, which has been the key of my trust, ever since he got his education, and entered into his apprenticeship? No son could be more dutiful to a father, nor did I love any of my 3 sons better than him, and he has a noble mind. But, sir, I have observed him more thoughtful for these 2 months past than usual, and taking him into my closet, asked what it was that fretted him, and told him that I heard as a very great secret that he sent letters by a special messenger to your housekeeper, and that I thought he would not conceal anything from me, adding that it would add to my sorrow if I should look little in his eyes. He fell down on his knees and said, I call heaven to witness, if filial affections ever diminished, all your afflictions were oppression to my soul. I have petitioned heaven to take that load of sorrow from you, and lay on me, and yet this dear creature you mention hath rivaled you about 10 years in my love. I answered, my dear son, I very willingly submit to my rival, and nothing would be a greater temptation for me to wish for life more than to see thee married to so virtuous, worthy, and industrious a woman as she. I have so little hope, answered he, that I altogether despair of ever being so happy. I asked him when he saw her. His answer was, not these 7 years. Says I, how should you hope to get her, if you have not been in her company for 7 years? That was not my fault, said he, for I would have tramped through frost and snow on my bare feet to be 1 hour in her company, with her own consent. But such was the restraint she laid me under, and if I made the least breach of any one article, it should be a total discharge. Her commands were these, that she would marry no man that did not solicit her 7 years in writing, nor would she receive any more letters from him but one every month, and that she would give answer to every 10th letter, and no oftener. Her last letter seems full as indifferent as the first. Let me read it, said I. He brought me it, and indeed, sir, I never saw a letter wrote by a woman that contained so much judgment and good sense. I bid him not despair, for as she possessed a great share of reason, so good a creature cannot be void of love and honor, that will reward all thy pains. He told me it would not be his fortune to get such a woman, otherwise she could not have tortured so long a time what she loved. Let me see this despairing man, answered I. He came just in his working clothes. I said, young man, you may put on another coat, and ride home with me. I have to treat with you in a building affair. He made a very low bow, and said he would be ready in a minute. Scarce had his master and I drunk a dish of coffee till we saw the horse standing at the door. His master whispered me not to let him know the contents of our conversation, nor did I discover the least word till this instant. Now, as the greatest prudence has conducted every other action of yours, we can witness, since you came into this family. Nor do I at all dispute but that you have a secret reason for this terrible courtship that you have contrived, and as there is a frankness in you, give us the motive that induced you to it. For had your mistress put me under such 7 years' penance, she had set me distracted. I with great composure answered, circumstances altered cases. Yours, sir, and that good lady were the offspring of 2 worthy families, had both the benefit of liberal educations and bountiful fortunes, have 2 bodies and 1 mind, possessed with every blessing under heaven, whose light so shines that we, your servants, that daily behold your good works with praise and admiration, would very ill deserve these benefits if we quit them for uncertainties. As I was entrusted with the distribution of some part of your charity, to the relief of the distressed, which gave me the prospect of the different characters of the lowest class of mankind. In visiting the sick, for which my mistress gave me 2 hours every day, I found more distempers proceed from churlish husbands than any other cause, some in drinking, when their wives and children are starving for meat and clothes, carrying some relief to a poor widow with 4 children lying in the smallpox, who begged of me to call at a cottage 1/4 of a mile from her house. There, says she, is a pretty young creature in great distress, who was deluded from her mother's house by a young wild fellow, a carpenter, who got her persuaded to marry him under specious pretenses of keeping her like a lady, and as soon as she was in his full power, and abandoned by all her friends, put her into that poor cottage, without furniture, except 2 stools, a bedstead, and bed without curtains. He came home last night, and brought her a leg of mutton, which she boiled to his dinner, she having a neighbour, wife to a prodigal bricklayer, who had left her with a child sucking on her breast, without meat or money. She begged leave of her husband to let her give the poor woman a morsel of meat and a mess of broth, which he, enraged with fury, swore he had a charge great enough of maintaining her. And do you bring more upon me, the feeding your neighbours, and furiously struck her on the head, and cut her with a knife to the skull. I, knowing of the distress of the bricklayer's wife, who is a relation to me, carried her a pint of milk and a barley cake, which she could not eat, although dying of hunger. I, hearing the bitter cries of the woman, went into the house, and found her in the greatest agony of grief, all besmeared with blood, she telling me the words that I have already repeated to you. This being Sunday evening, I had taken the groom to ride before me. I thought it lucky to have a man with me on such an errand, so rode up to this cottage. I lighted from my horse, went into the house, and to my great surprise found this pretty young creature to be a tenant's only daughter of yours. She, seeing me, discharged a fresh flood of tears, and said, "Oh, that I had died, rather than I should have given the pain of my hardships to a heart so humane as yours." But let me ease that pain by dressing your wound. You need not tell me how you got it. I know who gave it you, and for what. So cutting away the hair, washed the wound with a little warm water, to take the blood from it, making it clean, laid some balsam to it, and put a bandage round her head. Now, said I, you are eased of the pain. Let me know how you came by this bargain. In a great hurry, said she, for you must know my mother was so much afraid of me that she would not trust me out of her sight, hired a woman to teach reading, writing, and sewing, and so brought about this bargain. After she had taught me all she was able, then she recommended this man, as one whose father had a great estate, and that he might keep me as grand as any lady. I was easily prevailed on to make this runaway wedding. She thought to persuade my mother to take me home, but has found herself mistaken, for instead of giving her any further credit, made all inquiry after her character, and has found her to be an impostor and a common prostitute, that had borne this man to another poor woman's husband, when she was but 20 years of age, was a kept mistress, very grand by a gentleman, till his death, but he leaving her no subsistence, she was abandoned by all that knew her, yet having a relation that was an intimate of my mother's, which she came to in great distress. This woman recommended her as a virtuous, understanding woman, very fit to instruct me, as she was mistress of her needle. And such was the credulity of my mother, that she took her into her house, gave her £3 a year, and kept her 7 years teaching me. She, for her own private views, got me matched to her son, that is not so quick-sighted as his mother, vulgarly wicked, and tyrannically cruel. He was beating me one day, when one of his companions came in, and asked him what crime I had committed. He answered none. I give her this exercise for my own diversion, and to make her an obedient wife. A woman, a dog, and an ivy tree, beat them well, and the better they will be. Curse on all wives, a curse on my mother, that bound me to one. Was not thou and I far better single? We were far better, answered the other. Come go home with me, and I will beat my wife to make her good. Thee and me will get ourselves drunk, and let them weep on. I said, can you love this man after all this tyrannizing he treats you with? Love him, answered she, no, but dreads him as much as a serpent. But had you not better make an elopement from him, and go to your mother, that must love you? But how can I have the assurance to look my mother in the face, after I have given her so much disgrace and sorrow by my ingratitude? I answered, if I should procure your mother's pardon, and she be willing to receive you into her former favour, and take you from this husband that uses you so ill, could you be content to live without him? Yes, and sit down on my knees, and pray for my deliverance from a brute. Would know better how to value my blessings, and pay my duty to the best of mothers, that has lived a widow 16 years, although she might have been married to very responsible men, which she refused, told them that they would not court a widow, but on expectation of a lumping bargain, that they should not impair my fortune 1 farthing, and that she never would give any man her hand, as she had no heart to give. I therefore do pay that honour due to her with a penitent heart. But pray tell me, answered I, what situation of life is your neighbour in? She is wife to that companion of my husband's, said she, and the more miserable in one respect, for having a child sucking on her breast. She requires more food than his small matter which he gives her will procure, it being but 1 shilling a week, although he can earn 9 shillings per week. Have you no better salary? No, but I have a joint of some sort of butcher's meat, which I always boil and makes broth, to help my neighbour with, whose husband perhaps will not see her for a month, as he sends her salary with my bargain. One time I complained of the small matter for a wife and a child, and he damned both her and me, bidding us work for more. These 3 days past we had but a penny loaf, and 3 pints of milk betwixt us, And if you were sensible of the pain that poor mortal complains of when she wants food, the child crying for the breast, to still its complaints, gives it the empty breast to suck. And she says the child pulling and drawing her breast when there is no milk in it is just tearing her heart out, and raises such colics and wind at her stomach as renders her miserable. Vexation and hunger, I think, seems to get the better of her constitution, for if after a long fast she eats, it seems to give her pain instead of refreshment. And what frets me more is, that I shall share the same fate, as I am 7 months gone with child. You hope for relief, answered I, and direct me to your distressed neighbor, if you can point me out the entrance, as you are not able to go with me. I think you have given me new spirits, answered she, to show you the door. We live both under one roof, yet the doors open contrary, the one in the back side of the house, and the other in the foreside. Entering the house, beheld it more decently furnished, yet a more melancholy prospect, for the mother and child were perfect skeletons. The feeble mother had boiled the pint of milk with the bread, the poor widow had carried her, and the poor meagre infant ravenously fought for its food, when the feeble mother was not able to feed it. Nor had she spirits to speak to me. I saw the tears in her eyes, but hearing her story before, I did not disturb her with asking questions. I bid them both hope for better. Providence was a wonderful supporter of all those who put their trust in him. So taking my leave of them, rode home in all haste, and sent a poor woman that was employed in weeding the gardens, with 2 bottles of malt liquor, a loaf of bread, some sugar, gave her money to buy milk and butter, and directed her to this cottage, bid her make possets of the malt liquor, bread, sugar, and milk, then give the woman bread and butter, stay by her and keep the child, and take the same care you do of other sick people, till I see you. Then, madam, I came to you, and told you that one of your tenants had been under a lingering illness for some time, and desired leave to visit her. You asked which of your tenants. I answered the prudent widow, that brought her beautiful daughter to see you. By all means go, if it be not too late, for 'tis 12 miles. I have time enough, madam, answered I, so I was ordered to take some cordials, very proper for many complaints. Away I went on a very good double horse, which was made ready. Having a good guide, we got there before they were in beds, and although the honest woman was labouring under the greatest affliction, yet she forgot it at the sight of me. Who she got in her arms, and said, What good star has conducted thee to my habitation? I answered, If you will order my guide cold meat, me a morsel of bread and butter, and retire with me into your lodging-room, you shall have the contents of my progress. She, spreading a cloth on the table, ordered her maid to bring on the cold beef, bacon, and veal, and a large dishful she brought her mistress, telling me at the same time that this was the general custom of the farmers, to boil as much meat one day as would serve them 3 dinners. For, added she, our time is taken up in taking care of our cattle and corn. We spend very little time in cooking. So taking me by the hand, led me into a very neat parlour, with a clean fireside, set out a little table, laid a cloth, and brought a cold pigeon pie, a large short cake, a very good cheese, a bottle of red port, and a bottle of white wine, and said, Blessed be that landlord that lets his tenants such farms, as will enable them to give their friend such a hearty welcome. For I can tell you, very few tenants enjoy the blessings of plenty that your master's tenants do. My servants live better than many masters that farms in this country. I would very ill deserve the blessing of such a landlord, not to acknowledge it. Here is one Esquire Stony Heart that lives in this neighbourhood. The plantation slaves are more happy than his tenants. One of them came to me last week, brought with him a 20 years' lease of his farm, 3 years of which being expired, and told me that he having been at a great expense in improving his farm, which appeared in this year's crop, behold, one of his landlord's vassals kept by him as a spy came, and seeing us very busy shearing, told me that I had forgot my rent day. I answered that they certainly never broke the term that came on the morrow. All the damage would only be paying up the whole year's rent, or forfeit the lease, answered he. Upon this the poor man came in the greatest confusion, brought with him the half-year's rent, due the day before, which all his last receipt testified, and begging of me to read his lease to him, which I did. Upon perusal I found that he entered this farm the first day of May, the yearly rent £80, which first half-year's rent was to be paid on Candlemas Day, and the other on Lammas Day. The non-payment of the rent on these 2 individual days, for such default the landlord should be entitled to have his full year's rent paid by the tenant on demand, or have his goods and chattels seized upon the premises. That such goods and chattels should be praised and sold the next day to the best bidder, and if these goods and chattels did not amount to a full year's rent, the lease to be void, and of no effect. I thought the honest industrious man would have dropped down. Fear not, man, said I will lend thee as much money as thy half-year's rent, and go pay him up, and bid Squire Stonyheart defiance. He wants to reap the profit of thy improvements, which, as one of thy neighbours told me, had cost thee £150. As I spoke the word, came a son of this farmer, and told his father that the fellow that was speaking to him, with 2 more in company, were driving all the cattle out of the pasture, and no doubt, said the boy, will sell Robin Hood's pennyworths tomorrow, besides the tricking you out of your lease. No, son, I bid them defiance, and thanks God for a worthy friend that will rescue me. So I lent him the money, and bid him tell Squire Stonyheart that he had not a tenant that was able to do such an act of humanity, as a tenant of Squire Goodman's did, who lent thee £40 to pray for long life to her landlord, and that rejoiced to see his tenants live, and to pray for reformation to all the family of Stonyhearts that are oppressors of their tenants, as he is. The man went to pay his ignoble landlord, full of joy, and I was as well pleased to have the opportunity of doing an honest man such a service. I don't speak this out of ostentation, for when I inquired into the state of my soul, I found but very little provision made for it. For this daughter that my vanity prompted me to show in a visit to the worthy family of yours, thinking to charm your dear lady with her beauty as much as she did me, I made her the idol of my soul, was deaf to any complaints of distresses, lest the relieving them should impair this daughter's substance. I told those in distress, who desired my help, that I was only a stewardess to my daughter, and would not run the risk of impairing the bounty of fortune which Providence had entrusted me with. I would not let any mortal converse with her. In all sorts of needlework, reading, writing, music, both German flute and violin, dancing, etc., I had her instructed by a woman, recommended to me by a relation of hers, and a pretended friend of mine. Thus, through too great an excess of credulity, I became imposed on, admitting only she, my daughter's associate. When my daughter was dressed and danced a minuet, I was so much charmed with her, that I was afraid to let her be seen, lest every one that beheld her should covet robbing me of her. If I took her to church, I muffled her face up so close that none could tell what sort of a face she had, and set her in a pew that I bought for the concealing her from the sight of the congregation. It stood one half facing the minister and people, the other part standing behind them in that part where she sits. I told her that when she went into the house of God, it was to pray and not to gaze or be gazed at by the congregation. When her father died, he left us worth £600, and said that such was his love, that if he had been possessed of £10,000, he would not leave 1 farthing from me. I have been 16 years his widow, and increasing this fortune by care and industry, find upon a true estimate myself to be worth £2,000. This I communicated to this perfidious woman, told her I had concealed my daughter from the world, as long as prudence directed me. Now I would have her to make an appearance suitable to her fortune. I will buy her 2 silk gowns, 2 full suits of silk, and a good stock of linen. I can make her a fortune of £2,000, and she shall appear as such. Then I am sure to surprise the world with a beauty that they were strangers to. You are very right, answered this artful woman. Your daughter's beauty and fortune may deserve a coach, yet you should have a good room, for you have not one fit to entertain a gentleman in. That is very true, answered I, but I intend to make that stone hall a good room. I will put 2 sash windows in it, a deal floor, and wainscot it chair height. Said she, I can recommend an excellent workman to you. Do send or write for him, answered I, for I have deals that have been laid upon jests in a hayloft these 2 years to dry. So have I nails, wainscot, and such timber as will be required to lay under the fir deals. She writ, and according to order 2 workmen came, and begun the work, made the sashes, and laid the floor. A hind's wife of mine, that lives in a cottage just at my house, was in labour, and the poor man called me up to sit by his wife, till he rid for the midwife. I accordingly did, and raised up this woman and my maids to go with me to the poor woman in labour, that had not one neighbour within a mile but me, and the poor man had 2 miles to ride for the midwife. After she was delivered of a son, and the banquet done, the morning approached, and we returned home, I thinking to lie down by my daughter. But no daughter was there. I shouted out robbed, murdered, and undone, and raised all the house, but none could give an account of her. The carpenter came and said he could not find his man, though search was made, but no man to be found. In this great hurry came one of my men, and told me that the double horse and seat was taken out of the stable. Then says this wicked woman, Behold, the fellow must be the robber that has been guilty of this stealth. Your daughter is ungrateful to the best of mothers, yet she is your own. You have no more, and she knows you will pardon her, as there is no help for it. But the carpenter answering said, I rather think you the traitress that has committed this robbery, for this is your own bastard son, that you bore to a poor woman's husband. He served his apprenticeship to me, is contracted with a young woman in our neighbourhood to be married, although it will be a happy deliverance to her, to get rid of such a scoundrel. This is a scene of vice and wickedness. I wondered at the change of his behaviour, as I never knew him so long in a house, without giving disturbance, for he is a turbulent wicked fellow. I am sure, answered she, he is nothing obliged to you for the character you have given him. It is a just one, said he. So is it as just that you had your education at London. A grand man was at the expense of it, after you bore this son, and you was his kept mistress till his death, although he had a virtuous fine lady of his own. What you got of him was in money, which to my knowledge your son has drawn from you, as you were in great want before you got this place. I did not know where you were, till I received your letter, wherein you desired me not to discover him to be your son to this family. But as you have betrayed your mistress of all that she held dear, I cannot connive with the treachery. I told the man how much I should have been obliged to him if he had given me this relation in time. But as he might have no apprehension of what has happened, I excused him, as what he had then related might save me the inquiring any further after my unfortunate daughter, whose ingratitude should disinherit her of every penny belonging to me, and free me of any further imposition from that vile, impudent adulteress and infamous wretch. It being just at the term, I paid her her wages. All she had to receive was 40 shillings, and turned her out in an hour's time. I charged all my servants to keep it a secret, for if the country got the alarm of my daughter's disgrace, I should be teased with mercenary lovers, who would pretend to make amends for my daughter's disobedience, although nothing but private views may be their errands. And as I never intended to change my state of life, I would not be importuned upon any pretence in that respect. Added I, as I have kept my daughter for so great a stranger to the world, they will not know nor suspect anything about her. But when I examined myself, and considered what a hoarding and raking I had been making for so many years past, and all the wealth that I was entrusted with, what good had I done with it? I found so little comfort that I thought this was a just judgment sent down upon me, to chastise me for my ingratitude to that Supreme Being, that had enabled me to do good, which I had carefully neglected. Which I had carelessly neglected, and my greater vanity in keeping my daughter from conversing with honest men's virtuous daughters, because I thought them below her, as they were poor. And to have such a vile adulteress to taint her morals, by teaching her to despise me in 7 years' exercise, and with her arts and contrivances, to betray my daughter and me. Now, my dear, I am so well assured of your sincerity, that you will give your opinion honestly. Which of us, mother or daughter, is the greatest faulter? I answered that her own reasons were as just as mine could be, in remarking her ingratitude to heaven, and as this woman had her daughter so long under her care and instructions, might easily work on her tender mind, and prepossess her with such ideas and imaginary notions as tended only to ensnare and ruin her. But if this disappointment be only a call to remind you of what you had forgot, it may prove a tract to lead you into the right road to life eternal. So repeating to her the misery that I beheld her daughter in, and likewise her repentance, all which I have repeated to you before, adding that she had not disgraced her in being guilty of committing fornication nor adultery. Her crime she had suffered for, and she need not fear her committing it again. This was my errand to you, nor did I divulge it to my master or his lady. Then she got me in her arms, and embraced me with tears of thanks, and said, notwithstanding her great indiscretion, she was not willing to look so mean in their eyes, as the knowledge of it might hazard her. I promised her I would never speak of it to my master or lady. She asked me how she must get her from the tyrant. I bid her let a man and a horse be ready at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would direct them to her, as there was no fear of a husband being there to interrupt their design. So taking my hand, she kissed it, and said, "Oh, that my daughter had thy wisdom!" I answered, "Had she been as long under the directions of my lady as I had been, she would not have been so easily seduced." "That is certain," said she. "I have been the real cause of all her misery, and will relieve her out of the hands of that cruel tyrant." So she lighted me into the room that I was to lie in, and bid me good night. She rose and had tea made against 4 o'clock. When I came down, she asked me how I slept. I told her, "Very well." But answered she, "I have slept none, for thinking of my unfortunate child. Her ill fate will be at an end when you receive her again into your affections," said I. She had got the men their breakfast before I came down. I desired to be excused, it being rather too soon for my breakfast, but said, "If you will give me a little tea and sugar, and a thick slice of that shortcake, I will breakfast with your daughter." She accordingly did, and we set forward on our journey. After I had taken leave of her, and got to this cottage by 7 o'clock, I desired the men and horses to go to an adjacent farmer's house, to order corn and hay. So I went into the sick woman's house first, found it in decent order, and the nurse rocking the child in the cradle. I asked how the mother had rested, and if she had taken any food. She answered, "No, she has drunk a little of the posset drink, and thrown it up again." I went to the bedside to see if she was in rest. She lifted up her hands and eyes, and made a motion to pray for me, as far as I could understand by her muttering, that I had released her of the child. I bid the woman set on a pan. She answered, "There is a little tea kettle, 3 cups and saucers." I bid her cut some toasts of the loaf I had brought, and butter them, which she did, whilst I went to see the neighbor, who had just arose out of her bed. She, seeing me, cried, "My dream is out, for I have had the pleasantest dream of you, and my dear mother, all this last night. Now as you are the first I see in the morning, it bodes good luck to me." "Very good luck," answered I, "for I am come to drink tea with you this morning. So come into your next neighbor's, as I see you have no fire, and we will breakfast together." She did, and I told her what I had done for her. but the tears of joy that she in transport shed I never will forget. She could not eat one morsel, so I gave her the cake that I brought from her mother to eat on the road. But let me see your head, said I. I hope you will drink your tea first, answered she. No, said I, and then taking off the bandage, I dressed the wound, and bid her tie on a large handkerchief, to keep it warm, and to let it be clean washed before they laid the salve to it. Then I poured out a dish of tea, bid her drink it, and eat some toast. No, answered she, I am so full of joy, there is no room for eating. But let me give it to my distressed sister, for so we often called each other. She went to give her it, but the poor creature could not raise herself to take the tea. I put my hand under her pillow and raised her. She drank up the tea, but could not eat one morsel. She looked wishfully on her neighbor, said, I hear you have got a release, and lifting up her eyes to heaven, I hope so will I, in a little time, be removed out of all my troubles. Then turning her eyes to me, Blessed be thou, messenger of good to her, in restoring her to the indulgence of a tender mother, and of peace to me in my dying moments. I got the young creature dressed, and she gave some of her old things to the nurse, and charged her to take all the care of her sick neighbor that was in her power. I see her fairly on horseback, and was at home myself at breakfast. My madam was surprised to see me, asked if the widow was ill. I answered that she had been ill, but was much better. I told her of the distresses of the bricklayer's wife, and what I had done for her, in the presence of the doctor, that was at breakfast, who said that I gave a very authentic account of my patient. No, doctor, answered my mistress, we give our assistance to those that are not able to get better. But as there seems to be danger, visit you this patient, and do you give me your authentic opinion of her case. I will, madam, answered the doctor, if you will order me a guide to conduct me to the house. My lady bid me send the servant that had rid before me there. He accordingly did, and brought back the doctor's opinion, which was, that she would be dead in less than 12 hours. The nurse came the next day, and told me that she sent for the husband, immediately after the doctor was gone. Yet he did not come till this morning, when his wife was dead, and laid upon the bedstead, having no board. The carpenter coming in said, it would be a blithe sight to us both, where mine is fairly dead as thine is. The old woman answered, you have got as fairly quit of her, for she is gone. Joy go with her, said he. So the two miscreants gave a great shout, in the presence of several of the neighbors that were there. One of the women bid them not shout, till they got through the wood. The carpenter said, was not 40 shillings and a dead wife worth £5, which deserved a shout? But said she, where is the 40 shillings? He answered, there is furniture worth £5. But, said she, the wife is to bury, and the child to bring up. O dame, answered he, I have as much fur deal as will make her coffin. I saw her going, for which reason my friend and I had it ready. He will make it for nothing, and we will have as many of our own fraternity as will carry her to the churchyard. We will sell the furniture of each house, and have a merry carouse with the money. But who must take care of the infant? Answered she. It will follow the mother soon, said he. Come, I will give any one 40 shillings that will quit me of it, and if it die in a month, they will have the money. That is as much as to say, kill it when they are weary of it, said she. If they kill it, they may hang for it, and if it dies, there is an end of it, said he. The old woman said, give me 40 shillings, and the mother's clothes to make up into frocks, and I will take it. It's a bargain, answered the father. I know she has not many. I took them away by littles, just as I wanted money. So take them and the cradle into the bargain, and there is the money, which I borrowed to bury the mother. So make you the coffin, put her in, and nail her down. Then we will go for our brotherhood to lift her to the place of interment. The child is gone today. We will cant the goods tomorrow, and rendezvous the next day. This woman has had this infant 6 years, as fond of it as ever parent was of their own child. She was soliciting me to get her into my master's school, a beautiful young creature, and declares that the father never came to see whether it was dead or living. I could enumerate the hardships that I have seen many poor women labor under, by the oppression of churlish husbands, yet none were such complete tyrants as these two. When I thought on the general behavior of the vulgar sort of men, my computation was that their want of understanding deprived them of the virtue of mutual love, as want of decency is want of sense. They marry for mercenary views, or for the conveniency of gratifying their brutal appetites, after which their wives are no more than their vassals, loathe them as they do their meat, when they can eat no more. Therefore, sir, the danger that attend a married state was the motive which obliged me to be particularly cautious how I encountered it, for having conceived a very mean opinion of the lower herd of mankind, and resolving never to marry for the sake of fortune, so that all men were so indifferent to me, that all I wished or prayed for was to do my duty in the comfortable state of life I was in, therefore making this resolve not to run the risk of my future peace, which a churlish husband might blast, by involving myself in a contentious life that might endanger my future bliss, was determined never to marry. Yet when I received the first letter from this youth, and perused it seriously, I thought it could not be the language of a savage breast, nor was it like the dictates of a mechanic, as the style had dignity in it, which nothing inferior to liberal education could support. For in such places as yours, we servants think we have liberal education at the second hand. This was a prompter to the lofty answer that I returned, which he so far from resenting, willingly complied with the 7 years' injunction, with such serenity, wisdom, and deportment as justly entitles him to the prize, that is not worthy the pains he has taken for it. But my hero down on his knees, and said it was 100-fold reward.